bread. You can toss and tumble on a sleepless bed, but you're wasting your time trying to lose the blues. Lose the blues, lose the blues.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome
to It's
to
Your Time.
It's Your Time You're Wasting.
Oh, Martin, it's half term.
You must be relieved.
Oh, pretty relieved. And I haven't even, to be completely honest, I haven't even done the whole term because I started late. So for all of the, honestly, 8 weeks, an 8-week term with all of the COVID restrictions in place, running around in between classrooms, you know, where doing all of the other gubbins that needs doing.
Have you been running around?
Martin, look at me. I'm a shadow of myself.
You're like Gareth Bale coming back to Tottenham. You're getting yourself into the swing of things by slowly limbering up.
You've lost me there, Martin. I think you're talking about sport or something, aren't you?
So half term then, half term holiday. Are you planning to do anything like visit Wales, or you can't do that? But go somewhere.
I might pop to Liverpool, see what's going on there. Maybe North London. That's looking nice. No, I mean, obviously, the idea of doing anything at all is abhorrent to me right now. But I think, you know, it just really brings it home that 1 week doesn't feel like enough. An 8-week term. It's a long term. Next week's another long term. Next term's another longish term. And you know, should we the whole debate over summer holidays? Should we chip a week off and bung it in the middle here?
Well, you'd be like the posh schools then, wouldn't you? 2 week half term.
I'm all for being like the posh schools, Martin. Yeah,
and you could go on proper holidays to the Greek islands and things like that.
That sort of thing, for the skiing maybe.
Now, who have we got on tonight's show?
Well, tonight's show is an absolute corker. We have the one, the only Katherine Birbalsingh, Commander of the British Empire, talking about the Queen and about COVID, a bit about her book, a bit about Black History Month, I think. She said a lot, so sort of people will have to wait for the full video, which will be released in the week. But we've got some top snippets from.
And you've been talking as well to Sam Strickland.
And I can't get rid of him. He's I've had him, obviously, the first returning guest on the show. He's got a new book out, so obviously very keen to promote that. But we ended up talking actually quite a bit about exams. If you remember last week, we had Stuart Locke on talking about the fact that exams really should go forward. And Sam gives a counter argument to that, which is quite interesting.
Okay, so we look forward to hearing that.
Who else did you talk to, Martin?
Well, I got it's Andrew Old of internet fame, Twitter fame, and blogging fame.
Did he speak with a bag over his head?
No, he's come out, sort of, if you see what I mean, and he's talking about what I said in the interview with him is 16 years of blogging, but apparently it's only 14 years. So that disappointed me to hear that now. 14 years of blogging.
I think you were getting him confused with Frederick Douglass or something, weren't you?
No, he's one of the original bloggers. Certainly there. When did Twitter start, by the way? Do we know?
I don't know. I've no idea when Twitter started. For me, it started in, I think, something like 2010 or 2011, something like that.
Right.
Which makes me, that makes me a relative old hand. When did it start for you, Martin?
I've got absolutely no idea. If I look it up, it'll probably tell me. I remember
in the early days, you were a picture of a bicycle.
I was Alfred Jarry, actually, with a bicycle, and Surreal Anarchy was my maiden name, shall we say?
So
and, I did it for about 3 months, and then never looked at it for about 2 years, and then came back to it.
And very pleased we were that you came back. The voice of Samantha has just said in my ear that Twitter started in 2007, but nobody was interested then, were they?
There you go.
Anyway, Martin, shall we just go straight into Katherine's interview and let people hear what she's got to say?
I think so.
Great.
Congratulations, Katherine Birbalsingh, on your CBE, the Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. Arguably, that makes you a child of the British Empire. I'm born in New Zealand, You lived in Toronto as well, I believe.
In Canada, yes.
And then you went to Oxford University doing French and philosophy and set up Michaela School in 2014. Now, certain controversy about the CBEs, OBEs and MBEs and the British Empire part to it. And certainly Benjamin Zephaniah decided not to have one, as he has been fighting against the legacy of empire all his life. So tell me, what is it about the British Empire and the medals that allowed you to say, that's fine, I'll have that?
Well, because, I mean, you know, it's just a title nowadays. I mean, I don't think we're celebrating the empire because there is no empire. My parents from the Caribbean, actually. My mum is from Jamaica and my father's from British Guyana. And they were really proud and thought it was brilliant. When Benjamin Zephaniah says he's fighting the legacy of empire, I'm not entirely sure what he means by that. Perhaps he means something like modern day racism. But we're all fighting the various issues that are in society nowadays. That include poor schooling, that why poor children fail, whatever color they are in schools. I mean, there's lots of things that I'm fighting. I like the Queen. You know, I like the fact that we have a royal family. I sort of feel that if you don't have a royal family, you end up with Trump and Tom Cruise. And what I mean by that is a country needs someone to kind of talk about, a family to talk about, to gossip about, to be interested in who they're marrying and what they're doing and all that sort of thing. And if you don't have a royal family, then either you have a president who people hate or adore and they argue about that, or you have members of Hollywood, for instance, who people adore in that way. And those people aren't very good at setting the tone in terms of how we should behave. And I think our Queen does a very good job of setting the tone. So I like her.
So, Katherine, all of the work that you've put into the culture of Michaela, obviously, like every other school in the country, I would imagine has been tested over this academic year with all of the challenges that everyone's having to face about being in a global pandemic. And I know you've had your challenges at Michaela. And it'd be interesting to hear about some of the things that you've had to deal with. But you've also gone on record as saying that there are some silver linings to what maybe has had to happen in order to cope with the effects of the pandemic. Would you mind telling us a little bit about, you know, both the obviously very real downsides and what some of the possible silver linings for the system might be?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was because of what I saw on Twitter, that various schools were obviously changing their ways of doing things. They were putting desks in rows. The teacher was having to stand at the front of the class and teach, whereas perhaps normally the desks were in groups and the teacher would move amongst the desks and keep the children on task. And I believe very much in a traditional education. All of the classrooms here, the teacher stands at the front and the desks are in rows. So we didn't have to make that many changes. It was already the case. I mean, our year groups were already in bubbles, so now we've just bubbled further into form groups. It was already the case that our children walked in single file in silence in the corridors, so that everything was very orderly. So there haven't been. I mean, we've made some changes, but I doubt we've had to make as many changes as perhaps in other schools. But the interesting thing for me is that I was finding that on Twitter, the teachers were saying, "Oh, look, actually, it does work better doing it like this. So maybe I'll keep this once COVID is gone." I certainly know from all the visitors who've come here who changed the methods in their classrooms that they certainly find that it works better. And it certainly works very well here. And when people come, and I always say to people, do come and see, you know, the children know so much, are so clever at being able to have discussions, have so many of their own opinions that are well informed. These are things that are achieved through a traditional way of teaching. So I feel that COVID has brought that about more so, even more so perhaps than Michaela has elsewhere.
Katherine, tell us a little bit about, you know, you just before we started recording, you were saying you unfortunately had to send some classes home, and one of the classes you've been in the position of having to send home is Year 11 class.
Yeah.
Can you, with that with that in mind, what's your position on exams and assessment this year, particularly?
Yeah, good question. And it's not so obvious. I think people just assume I'm a traditionalist, therefore I believe in exams. And I mean, look, I do sort of think there isn't any choice. We have to go with exams. We saw the fiasco that was last year with teacher assessment. It ends up being a nonsense. So we can't do for teacher assessment. I think we do end up having to do exams. But I find it very problematic because if I just think about our own children here, one of my year 11 classes got sent home. And yes, we taught them on Zoom. And yes, we do Google Classroom and so on. But we have found that if you're not able to hold the children to account for their learning, which you cannot do on Zoom, then the children don't learn very much. They learn something, but nowhere near as much as they do in a classroom. And I think for 20 years or more, there's always been this debate about whether or not tech can replace the teacher. COVID has put that to bed forever. It is very obvious now. Tech can never replace a real teacher in a real classroom, especially for disadvantaged children. They need us propping them up, inspiring them, quizzing them constantly in lessons to see whether or not they actually know this stuff. Zoom, that's possible because they've got the stuff in front of them, and you can't, when they're on the Zoom, they've got their papers there. So it is impossible to hold them to account. And that is a great travesty, obviously, in particular for year 11 or year 13 classes that end up being sent home. I've had to send home 2 classes, one year 8, which obviously was sad, but at least they're in year 8. For year 11, I thought, well, gosh, this class now is at a disadvantage in comparison to my other 3 year 11 classes. And that's just in our school. Having said that, there are disadvantaged children all over the country who happen to be perhaps in not a very good school, happen to have a not very good, science teacher or French teacher or English teacher or whoever it is. In many ways, the system has always been flawed because some children get lucky and get to a great school and some children are in not so good schools. So perhaps it's no different, but I feel that unfairness quite a lot this year, and I feel sad for our kids. But I mean, there isn't really much we can do to plow on and hope for the best.
And you're talking there about the importance of knowledge, and that brings us on to curriculum. We're in the middle of Black History Month at the moment, and can you tell me how you approach Black History Month?
Yeah, well, we don't do Black History Month. That's how we approach it. I don't believe in it. I find it grossly insulting. I mean, where's the Chinese History Month, and where's the Polish History Month, and where's the White History Month? It's just absolutely absurd. You lump all these black people together. There are Ghanaians, and there are Nigerians, and there are Jamaicans, and there are, Somalis. I mean, are they all the same? They all have the same history. I mean, I find the whole thing completely absurd. And then what happens is in Black History Month, all the deputy heads go round and give an assembly on Rosa Parks, because obviously she is the only black person who's ever existed. I mean, I find the whole thing ridiculous. What schools ought to be doing instead is making sure that their history curriculum includes black figures and black historical events in this country. So when I say in this country, or that are part of British history, because obviously British history did span the globe, as we referred to at the beginning with the empire. So it's important that once upon a time, the million Indian soldiers that were in the world wars, the several 100,000 Caribbean soldiers, again in the world wars, that helped save this country, and they gave their lives, they were never mentioned, and they were literally whitewashed out of history. And black people in this country had to campaign for many years to get a monument up in central London to recognize the contribution of the Commonwealth. So I strongly believe in that. However, what we don't want to do is then say, so we just, Black history, even the term Black history makes me annoyed. It's not Black history. It's about teaching British history and making sure black people are included in it. And that's what we do here. So our history curriculum is really thorough, really good, because we're teaching from the front of the class. We're teaching explicitly. Our children really learn their history. And we make sure that as part of that British history, they learn about India and Gandhi and the Amritsar massacre and the Mau Mau massacre in Kenya and slavery. And we also do, actually, because we also do civil rights and so on in America, simply because it's had such impact. And so we think that's an important thing that they should learn. There's a whole variety of things that we include in that curriculum. Now, that's important. And if that isn't being done in some schools, that's a problem. But to throw Black people a bone of Black History Month and say, there you go, we'll just do Rosa Parks every week in assembly is ridiculous and insulting. And I don't agree with it. You know?
Well, that's really clear. And so the other calls that, and I think you've probably sort of started to address this a little bit. Well, when people talk about decolonising the curriculum, what do you make those sorts of requests or demands?
Yeah. Well, it depends on what they mean. I mean, if they mean what I just said, make sure that you haven't got a whitewashed curriculum, then that's a good thing. If, on the other hand, it means that you're not going to teach much Shakespeare, then I have a problem with that, because Shakespeare is universal. He speaks to us all. It doesn't matter that he's white. This idea that Black children cannot identify with Shakespeare because he's white is ridiculous. Your skin color of the author does not determine whether or not a child can understand what the author's talking about. And when someone like Shakespeare has had influence over 400 years of literature, and someone like, say, Maya Angelou used to say that she always thought that Shakespeare was a Black woman because he understood the plight of Black women so well. It is because it is universal. And I do worry about this trend of thinking that skin color is the overarching factor that decides whether or not we can understand something. It really isn't. We're all human underneath, and that's what matters.
There we go. It's a great interview, and if you want to see more of it, please subscribe. And when the interview gets released during the week, you'll be able to get a little reminder that it's out there to viewing. It's a really, really interesting interview. What do you think, David?
Well, I did think it's a great interview, but that's not the only reason to subscribe, is it, Martin? Because subscribers will also be entered into a draw where one of the weekly prizes next week will be a copy of Katherine's book, The Power of Culture, and so look, the benefits just keep coming. But no, it's a really wide-ranging interview. I love. We didn't really capture it in that bit, but in the interview, Katherine talks, as you heard, talked about liking the Queen, and she talks about the sort of the structure of her school. You've got the teachers, and then you've got the senior teachers, and then you've got the headmistress, and then you've got the Queen. And I love the fact that Katherine's second only to the Queen. And anyway, but lots and lots said there. Katherine's position about Black History Month is an interesting one. And I don't know about you, Martin, I think it'd be great to have somebody on the show that argued the other perspective, perhaps, why celebrating Black History Month might be really, really important in schools.
I think there's a lot of support for her view generally. What is interesting there is what she's saying about not whitewashing history, and perhaps the reason for Black History Month is originally that schools were whitewashing history, that there was no space for Black history at all, and therefore the point she's making, I think, are very much that Black history should be included, but it's not necessary to have it in a month if it's included throughout history. It is part of history.
Right.
All human life is here,
And a similar point about decolonisation of the curriculum. If it means what Katherine is talking about, then it's a very different thing and maybe more palatable to a lot more people. Because nobody wants, as you say, the curriculum whitewashed, or, I mean, probably there are some people that probably do, but yeah. No, absolutely, Martin. And
I thought tech was good. The point she said about tech, COVID has put tech to bed. Now, do we agree with that?
Well, I mean, forever's an awful long time, and I certainly think that there are people who won't agree in the moment right now with her assessment. But I think broadly she's correct there, that there is currently, as things stands, that teaching lessons via Zoom or pre-recorded or Google Classroom or all of these different things, they're great. They've been a lifesaver. They've made the difference between school and no school for many children. But do they replace the interaction between teachers and students in classrooms? Probably not, and unlikely to do so for some years to come.
Particularly about the disadvantage, of course, is well made. And if you've got no tech at home, or the tech you've got is shared amongst a lot of people, or you're all trying to do your homework in one room, or be taught different lessons in one or two rooms, it's a slightly different world to the world where you each have a computer in your bedroom in the west wing of your house, or whatever it is,
A very different world, yes. And and talking about that very different world, it's sort of an awkward segue here, perhaps, from Katherine's interview, but we've had in the news again. Here's the segue. Katherine CBE, an MBE, awarded an MBE, Marcus Rashford, the footballer, probably for as much as anything else, for his work during lockdown to try and ensure that children who were entitled to free school meals got them, is again asking for children to receive free school meals over the Christmas period. But there's no room at the inn.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary one, this, because beforehand, the government backed down. And again, here, the impression might have been that they might back down, but this time they weren't. And is it an own goal? Is it sort of saying, well, what's going on here? Why is the government doing this? Why have they done this?
Extraordinary, Martin, and I think that many people will have caught during the week Nicky Morgan, the former Education Secretary, saying on Newsnight that if only Labour hadn't referred to a Tory MP as a scum, then maybe they would have got more support. And the idea that we're playing party politics over this sort of issue is not going, I don't think, going to go down very well with many voters. It's hard to see how this is going to gain the government any kind of support. And I don't know, for me, it's done a great deal to remind me of why I don't tend to vote Conservative.
It's interesting that in Wales and Scotland, different arrangements are occurring, and some councils and also restaurants and others are sort of stepping into the breach, if you like, to sort this out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. People tweeting pictures of their local chippy saying that they're going to provide free food for children who are underprivileged. I mean, goodness knows how they're going to do that. But I think it really shows that sort of groundswell of popular support for such an obviously humane thing to do. And when you compare it to something like Eat Out to Help Out, which was geared to help the corporate world and cost a great deal of money. I don't have any figures to hand, and this would have been a fraction of the cost. It does seem extraordinary that the government wouldn't want to back this.
Is it a short-term thing, or is it a long-term thing? I mean, should free school meals be provided during the holidays anyway, or is it just at this time, perhaps?
This is a societal problem, isn't it? And it's not. It shouldn't be up to schools to solve these things. It shouldn't be up to Marcus Rashford to solve these things. It should be the case. Obviously, we wish that there are safety nets in place for these children. But in the past, and I think the difference between now and in the past is that because of COVID restrictions, it's that much harder for the charitable organisations that go out and provide the kind of end stopping, which maybe government or society in some broader sense should be can't do it. They can't do those things because of the pandemic, and so it's really highlighting this, and the cracks are really opening up in a way which perhaps it was easier to ignore before.
Right, and it's the poor who always get it worse, of course, no matter what's happening, because they've got less resilience to various things, whether it be food, whether it be warmth, whether it be computing in the home to do your homework or whatever. They're obviously going to get hit hard, which makes you think about exams and what's coming up with them.
Yeah, and it was really interesting, Katherine's take on that, wasn't it? That people are always disadvantaged by exams, but maybe this is even more the case again. Even these fissures opening up like never before. And on that, the interview that I did with Sam Strickland in the week does touch on this issue. So maybe we should go and listen to a bit of Mr. Strickland. Oh, maybe not. Welcome back to Samuel Strickland, head teacher of the Duston School in Northampton, and it's second time we've had you on the show, Sam. So friend of the show, repeat visitor, and you've got goods to sell, which is why you're here, isn't it? New book out.
Yeah, indeed. No, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Education Exposed 2, and I mean, if I'm any judge of these things, Education Exposed 1 did some pretty good work. It was flying off the virtual bookshelves, wasn't it?
So, yeah, it sold really, really well and went down well. Yeah,
great. So first question then: what inspired you to write a sequel?
I'd already written quite a lot of the content for the sequel when I wrote the first book, and I wanted to make the first one pithy and punchy because my own feeling was I just wanted to see how it would go down with people. I also wanted something that was going to be quick and easy to read and would give lots of hopefully useful hints and tips. And I was sort of probably deviously with quite a lot of material as well. And then seeing how Education Exposed, leading a school in a time of uncertainty, went down with the masses, so to speak, I thought it was worthwhile venturing into Education Exposed 2. I wanted to delve a little bit more into the curriculum, a little bit more into behaviour, and specifically into classroom management strategies that people can implement, and also to think a little bit more about teaching strategies that will make the knowledge stick. The first book was really more geared towards middle and senior leaders, although it's applicable to anyone at any level. And I tried to make the second book more applicable to class teachers. And that's really why I wrote number 2.
So those people who basically the subtitle for Education Exposed 2 is about the halcyon dream. And so, Sam, can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by the halcyon dream?
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic question, is it? Why am I a teacher? And it's one that's often asked for trainee teachers, and actually the question that sometimes you get asked at interview, what drives you? What's your educational philosophy? And the whole premise of the book is around allowing teachers to teach, allowing teaching to be the main focus of what we do in our schools. And actually, if we're throwing 1,001 initiatives and elements of white noise really at our staff, which detract from what we're actually trying to get them to do, which is to teach really good quality lessons. Why are we doing those things? So the focus and drive of the book is trying to reinforce that whole idea of why we actually entered this profession, which is a passion for our subject, to want to help other people, to want to enlighten educationally the next generation. And that's really the premise of the book.
Okay, so at this point, we should ask you that question, Sam. What drove you to become a teacher?
Yeah, when I think back, there's a real passion for history, which is my main bias and specialism, and I really wanted to share that kind of love and enthusiasm for history with children. And I'd already undertaken, before I did my PGCE, some time in secondary schools and primary schools to get a bit of a feel for what it may be like, and you only get a small snapshot, of course, but it felt, this will sound very cheesy, but it was like my calling. And I'm sure many other people will say similar kinds of things really to that, and it's a very much an X Factor style kind of answer. But for me, that was in the original place, because I really, really had a driving passion for history that I wanted to share with other people.
So this book really is for your younger self. It's for teachers who have that passion and making that a reality, so that they're not bogged down in admin or behaviour management, that they can get on with the business of conveying their delight in the subject that they're there to teach. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary, David, and that's really the essence of the book. It's getting people to think. I mean, the book is divided into 4 sections. The first section looks at what the halcyon dream actually is, and tries to iron out some of the misconceptions within our profession. So flight paths being one example, the use of bloom being another, which I know you'll be completely au fait with. The second section looks at the curriculum and gets people to think about the mapping and planning of the curriculum, but more importantly, strategies to implement the curriculum within the classroom and to make the knowledge stick, and the importance of knowledge. The third section is about behaviour, and there's a chapter on whole school behaviour, but then there's also 2 chapters on specific classroom behaviour management strategies, which I think is really invaluable, because whilst a school system can be centrally driven and could be great, there's still that element of you're in the room with the kids on your own, and you've got to be able to do your bit as much as the school should be doing their bit. And then there's a section on leadership, again within the book, which again reinforces what leaders can be doing to allow the house in dream to be the house in dream.
You said earlier that the curriculum is a major focus of this book, and you have 3 chapters specifically dedicated to different aspects of the curriculum. Can I ask you, Sam, as almost by way of summary, what do you think is the biggest barrier that schools face in putting together a really great curriculum?
The biggest barrier, I mean, it depends on the school. Behaviour, I would argue, is one. And I know I talk a lot about behaviour and I tweet a lot about behaviour as well. But if behaviour isn't where it needs to be, and I use my own school as a case in point, that behaviourally, the school wasn't where it should have been when I joined. And you can't talk to staff about the curriculum design, how lessons are going to work, if the response that you get back from staff is, but the kids just simply don't behave and they're not going to listen. And I think that is a very powerful counter argument back from teachers. So I think on one front, you need to do something about that. And then I would say the next biggest barrier is time and subject knowledge. That is another barrier to the curriculum in its own right. And they're 2 things that you've got to, on one front, create and carve the time for teachers to be able to work together as teams, to think about their curriculum, to train them in the curriculum, which means getting rid of other rubbish that perhaps has less relevancy within your kind of cost benefit analysis of your school and what you prioritize and think is important or isn't. But then equally, whilst it's great to give people the time to think about their curriculum, they need to know their subject pretty well. Otherwise, what are they thinking about?
No, okay, so that makes complete sense to me. And obviously, I've over the past term, I've been back in the classroom working in a range of different schools, and I have to say, teaching, trying to convey challenging material, if behaviour is not good, then you can forget it basically. And so the schools I've chosen to work with are ones where they've got a very serious attitude towards getting behaviour right, and they're determined to make that happen. And it just makes it possible for me, as a relative unknown quantity, going in with kids I've not met before, to actually have a hope of teaching them something that is worth knowing, and rather than being embattled and sort of fighting them every step of the way. And it makes a huge difference. So I'd completely agree with that. That if you've got behavioural problems in your school, they need to be addressed before you're probably going to make anything else work. With all that's going on globally, the schools trying their best to operate as normal in a global pandemic. I don't know whether you felt this yourself, but I think some people have felt it to be a bit of a challenge. And so, where does that leave us in terms of goals and priorities? So, over August, opening in September, what did you have as your priority for this year?
So before this year, because we always formulate our school improvement plan around Christmas and then launch it to the staff in a kind of a loose sense in January on our January inset day, and then give kind of the devil in the detail around Easter time.
Right.
So we had already set that this year was going to be about doing the same but even better. So it's slowing everything down. And I know you're kind of familiar with our tale at Dustin, but we'd changed basically everything, and we'd started to launch kind of in its infancy, because I think it takes a long time to actually have a knowledge-rich curriculum properly in place. So we wanted to slow everything down this year, but this is pre-COVID, so that every single member of staff really understood what we're about, what we're trying to do, and to try and refine everything that we have in place so far before we then start to think about what's next. And we want to try and embed a number of forms of deliberate practice this year, which I do talk about in Education Exposed, such as shaping answers and manners. They were 2 of the big things I wanted to see with the pupils. Then you kind of fast forward to COVID, and the driver really has been to try and open the school safely, to keep the school open ultimately, and the kind of feel the tightrope I'm walking now is one of day-to-day almost crisis management, whereby you're 2 seconds away from another COVID case disaster arising on and appearing on your lap, and what do you do about it when one does, unfortunately.
So you've been hit relatively hard, I believe.
Yeah, we've had about 14 cases of confirmed COVID cases since we've been back, and that's staff and pupils. It's
Right.
affected more the upper end of my school, so it's impacted on year 11 and 12 and 13, which is hard to stomach actually as a head, as an educator, and seeing pupils who know that they've got exams this year. That's been really hard for them to take, especially when I look at year 13 pupils who are submitting UCAS applications, hoping to go aspirationally to some really top universities. Because again, we've changed the school so much in terms of its fortunes. The level of aspiration amongst our pupils is high. They want to go to the top thirds of universities, but with that comes the pressure of knowing they've got to get top grades.
Right.
And then seeing where pupils are having to self-isolate, I can understand the anxiety that's come through from some of our pupils and our staff.
Okay, so on that note, we've got a tweet here that you sent out recently. I hope can we put this up on the screen so we can just talk about this. And last week on the show, we spoke, amongst others, to Stuart Locke, CEO of a group of schools in Bedfordshire, and he was talking about a letter that he'd organised that went to the Times, urging the government to go ahead with exams. And it'd be really interesting to hear your take on that in the context of this tweet.
Yeah,
What you've just been saying.
I mean, ordinarily, I'm actually quite a big advocate for exams. So this feels quite. I'm quite torn over this in many regards, because I've got my own normal, I guess, bias, I suppose, for want of a better phrase, that I actually think exams are probably the fairest way of judging pupil ability. But then when I think about the context of where we now are, and I appreciate that we had the exam fiasco that we had this summer. So what's the solution? I think is a difficult kind of question to answer. My fear with exams this year is that it's absolutely not going to be a level playing field. And for some schools, they are going to be more adversely affected by COVID than others. And I hope as time goes by, other schools are not affected in the way that some schools have been. I mean, within my own locality, 2 schools have had to completely close.
Really?
I think about my own school. We had to ask the whole of our year 11 to self-isolate, which is absolutely galling to see. And we can talk about remote learning till we're blue in the face about how good, bad, or indifferent is. It's not a substitute, ultimately, I would argue, for what happens in school and in classrooms. And a big fear for schools like my own is actually the pupils need us, the teachers. They need to be in our lessons. They need to be in school. I look back at all of the exam result data that I've analysed over the last 4 or 5 years. The pupils who get the best results have got 96% plus attendance, and that's just a straight fact. And it's not rocket science to work that out. But my fear going forwards, if the trend and trajectory carries on as it is, which is that we're going to have staff self-isolating, pupils self-isolating, an endless wave of teachers having to cover one another, supply teachers coming in, the overall quality of delivery in schools is going to, unfortunately, not be where we would like it to be, being polite. And equally, there's that juggling act of trying to juggle remote learning with what's happening in school, and something's going to give, ultimately. I would argue, as we move forwards. And I can see more and more staff becoming more stressed. And I've seen a level of stress and exhaustion that I've never seen in my career so far. And we're only really, 8 weeks in, which is a long time for a half term. And I know some schools have done 10 weeks. But in the grand scheme of the academic year, we're not that far in. And we're already seeing issues in a way and a volume I have never seen in my career. So for me personally, and this isn't meant in a battle line sort of format with other people, I respect other people's views on this. I just question whether exams are the right thing for this year. I would like to see them, though, when things return to normality, we go back to them. I would hate to think that if we did, in a national sense, not have exams for 2021, that suddenly, you know, it's the baby out with the bathwater. I think that could be dangerous, but I think we need a pragmatic approach to what's happening this year. And I don't think, with due respect, the additional 3 weeks, whilst I welcome it, is actually going to compensate or recompense for 6 months of lockdown and then all the issues that we've seen over the last sort of 8 to 10 weeks nationally across the sector.
Okay. Well,
Oh, there we go. We had a couple of comments during that from one from Saksak, who said, Sam always talks sense. Let teachers teach.
yeah, let's let them do that. That seems to no percentage in stopping them teaching.
And Michelle Swallow, I wonder if many schools are doing November exams. We are in FE, and what happens when some of these students have to self-isolate and aren't able to attend?
Yeah, genuinely, I don't think there are good answers about these things. So there are some students, and one class I work with myself retakes, year 13 retakes for GCSEs. They've got their exam in November as soon as we come back from half term. Who knows? Who knows? Someone who lives around the corner from me, his daughter was too ill to. She got COVID and she was too ill to go and do A-level resits. You know, these are really, really tough calls, and there aren't easy answers. I don't think it would be.
And with major numbers out at any particular time, particularly, it's. I don't know if it's more likely to be, but as far as I know, it is more likely to be the upper years. So years 11, 12, and 13 perhaps are going to be more affected. I don't know.
Well, yes. I mean, but also, you know, the current year 11 have also been probably quite heavily hit from being in lockdown for a good part of the year in year 10 as well. So I know, you know, many of the students I work with, the amount that they've missed means that they're running to stand still. I do think that year 11 students on the whole will be taking mock exams a lot more seriously this year than maybe they have any year in the past. And I know obviously the government is at the moment is committed to sticking to exams. And I think probably at this time in the year it's right to have that ambition, probably. But maybe things will change as we get nearer. And the truth is, nobody knows what's going to happen.
No, and time is of the essence here. I mean, if we're going to just put it back 3 weeks to make up for 3 months or whatever that people have missed, it's a worry for parents. It's a worry for the children, I should think, as well, who are involved in the exams, and what happens next year as well, because of course the current year 10s and year 12s are being affected too.
Yeah, my own daughter, eldest daughter's in year 12, and she's had 2 weeks at home self-isolating because a student in her year came down with a confirmed case. And so, you know, this is going to be a feature of education for at least this academic year, and who knows how far into the future. Obviously, we all want vaccines and what have you to be available as soon as possible, but how soon that will be, we don't know. We've got a commenter on YouTube sort of asking about e-portfolios and of course, you know, these are alternatives that are on offer. And I think the big argument that Stuart was making last week is that exams are the fairest form of assessment for the least advantaged students, and the less advantaged students do better on average in an examination system than any form of teacher assessment. The teacher assessment privileges the privileged, and nobody wants that. It's very uncomfortable to hear that, but it does seem to be the case. And you know, there's lots of countries, certainly a lot of European countries, that don't have national exams in the same way that we do, and obviously it's relatively straightforward for them this year to go with the equivalent to centre assessed grades. Martin, do you know what they're doing in Scotland? I mean, Scotland, obviously, we know they've cancelled exams. What are they doing in Wales and Northern Ireland?
I think from what I know, in Wales, they're carrying on with you're putting me on the spot here. An exam on exams in Wales. I'll see what I can do. I think they reduced the number of papers or something like that. I think they've taken things out. I'm not entirely sure though. But thank you for that.
But no, sorry about that, Martin. But
what's on my syllabus?
No, I know. Okay. But Scotland have obviously pulled the plug on exams this year early on, and I think listening to teacher friends in Scotland, some of them have expressed concerns that makes Year 11 a really hard slog, a really hard sell to students.
I was interested in what else Sam was talking about with behaviour and curriculum there, about the importance of those things coming in. And I'm particularly struck, which I always am when working with schools and when I was teaching, the issue of time, that teachers don't have real quality time to work together on such things as curriculum.
No, absolutely not. And I have to say, Martin, that having less time myself this term, being in the classroom, I do feel, I get back in the evening and my brain's turned to mush, and the last thing I want to do is, think about curriculum development and that sort of thing. So I absolutely sympathise with that. It's not as simple as simply giving teachers a free period or anything as banal as that. It's the extended time to think about curriculum and to make wise decisions that makes all the difference. And it's very difficult to see in the current setup how teachers can do that wisely or well. And it takes me back to David Carter's point in his interview last week about the fact that this is perhaps the purpose of a well-run multi-academy trust, that's the kind of capacity that can be created. And it's fascinating to think. I've been thinking a lot about his line that schools have maybe a moral obligation to be part of a trust. Yeah,
I mean, again, I'm not sure if some trusts that I've heard of are quite time poor as well. And
yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if that necessarily goes with it. I mean, Singapore, isn't it, or some Far Eastern countries where teachers are off teaching, face-to-face pupil teaching. They're off that for 50% of the time or something like that.
I think very few territories internationally have the same kind of teaching load as we do in this country. So it's we're a real outlier in the amount of classroom facing time that teachers have. And many other systems. So for instance, in Singapore, there's a really healthy, vibrant sabbatical system where teachers can, after a certain amount of service, they can apply to work with the Ministry of Education. They spend a year on secondment and then they come back to schools more expert, refreshed, lots of new ideas. And I think those sorts of any kind of initiative like that would be really welcome for our system. But we are where we are.
We are where we are. And perhaps one of the big changes over the previous few years and months has been to our load of teaching, if you like, and the amount of conversation that's going on has been through social media and blogs and other things like that, where teachers have been able to share their thoughts online. And of course, this is in their spare time, but it's given a huge amount of time for reflection and brought about a huge new energy, if you like, to teaching. And one of the people who sort of pioneered that, perhaps,
grandfather of the teacher. Yeah, absolutely. So you spoke to Andrew, and I think it's going to be an interview that people are going to want to watch in full, perhaps. So we've got some snippets from it for your delight and edification right now. But it's an interesting. Is it fair to say, Martin? It's an interesting psychological portrait of the teacher as keyboard warrior, perhaps. Let's see. Let's have a look.
Andrew, what do we call you, by the way? What surname should we give you?
Go with Andrew Old, I think, as that's what I am on Twitter and on my blog.
Okay, Mr. Old. You've been blogging 15 years. That's quite a stretch. Some people get prison sentences for murder for that. Could you tell us what got you into blogging in the first place?
I think originally it it was just the case that the debate I saw about teaching on the news and in newspapers had no relation to what I actually saw happening in schools. So I just wanted to be another voice out there saying, this is what I see in schools all the time. And originally that meant being absolutely anonymous because you couldn't say what was going on. I think over time that's changed, that people talk a bit more openly about their bad experiences in schools. I just wanted to push the debate that way so that teachers could recognise it.
So do you see?
And so a lot of those first blogs were. Sorry.
You carry on.
A lot of those first blogs were just in school at the time. I think after a while it was taking off, and I didn't want people to realise who I was, and I always put a delay. And now, well, loads of people, and so I never talk about my day-to-day experience, but it's still that same perspective of what seems important if you're in the classroom.
So do you see yourself perhaps originally as some sort of whistleblower?
There was an element of it, yes, because you would have these stories about how behaviour in schools was generally very good. I mean, the bad behaviour was just an exception here or there, and then you could go into your average comprehensive and see lessons stopped by ridiculously bad behaviour, and it didn't match up to that public dialogue. And there was a lot of prep teachers to say that they hadn't ever seen bad behaviour in a class. I think it was quite a different culture back then, because there was this emphasis that all bad behaviour resulted in bad teaching or from unmet needs. And at the moment, I think there is more of an awareness that behaviour policies in school matter, and you can have a discussion about behaviour policies. I also remember back then being told quite a lot that the schools with a reputation for good behaviour must be doing something wrong. They must be being too strict, or they must be selective. So back then, yes, I did feel like I was giving, that I was telling people what was going on.
Right. And what sort of response did you get in the early years, and how has that changed, do you think?
I think the big change has probably been the rise of social media apart from blogs. To begin with, there were perhaps things like the TES forums where it was mainly discussion. So to begin with, there was a bit of a phase where most of the response was from teachers, and they were saying, "Oh, thank you for sharing this. This is what I experienced." So, and then moved on to Twitter. There was a phase when the early adopters on education Twitter were mainly managers and consultants and educationalists. And then I think there was a phase of, who on earth is this teacher saying these things are happening? I swear they're not happening. Honest, they definitely don't happen in my school. And then as more and more people to Twitter, I think that shifted, and now probably the majority of people involved in conversations on Twitter about education are probably teachers. But I think there's still pressure not to talk about certain topics, and not to suggest that policies aren't working when they're policies that everyone's meant to agree with. And I think there is still plenty of space for teachers to dissent from what might be orthodoxy at any given moment.
So do you think Twitter, social media generally, has been perhaps a disruptor to the way things work?
Definitely. I mean, I cannot imagine the Steer report today, because if you put the Steer report, this was a behaviour report commissioned by the government in the noughties. If you put out a report now saying, "Oh, everyone's always behaviour was problem," really it isn't. It wouldn't be one. It would be thousands, possibly 10,000 of teachers on Twitter saying, "This is not what we see." that said, a culture to come back where teachers don't feel they can freely say that. And sometimes the debates on Twitter sort of feed into other parts of the world where teachers feel they can't really speak up and speak on their name. But I think it has changed. I think there's a lot more honesty now about what goes on in schools, and possibly less of a rigid debate where people say, well, there's politicians on one side and then everyone in education on the other side all agreeing with each other. And I think now with social media, you can really see that different jobs in education lead to very different attitudes. I mean, even, different views between managers and teachers that aren't promoted, but different educationalists and those that actually work in schools. Different views between those that teach subjects and those that have a specialism like SEN or something like that, or cross subject range. And I think perhaps a bit more distinction between different subjects. I mean, well, the difference between good maths teaching and good drama teaching is not something that's trivial. It's not just a little detail that the same basic techniques work.
Right. So, I mean, certainly with different subject areas and different roles in schools, people have different opinions. But within those areas, people have a wide range of opinions as well. How do we find out what is right in school teaching, or is there room for a range of different viewpoints?
It depends on the precise details of it. There are some things that are just a matter of fact. There are some things where people say, well, these ones every time, and then you go into the classroom for your next lesson and you realise that nothing like that happens. So when people that kids only misbehave because of a root cause, and we can find that and identify that, we know if we teach kids that sometimes they behave just for the hell of it. It doesn't, it's not to be investigated. So some claims, it literally is just, you can see it easily. Some claims you have to collect evidence, and there's huge debates now about what evidence actually counts. And a lot, I think now, is just arguing from authority. People say, here's an education, that must be what's true. We can't debate it, particularly if you're just a teacher. But then, on the other hand, there are legitimate differences in moral values that can't be resolved just by looking at evidence. There's different opinions that perhaps are so fundamental that you can debate them philosophically. I certainly think some debates in education come down to views about human nature. The trouble with education is because it's a wide field, there is no one discipline with the answer. You can have a debate about philosophy, theology, psychology, politics, and everything in between, and you bring in different disciplines. So just knowing, what is the relevant way to argue is often a cause of disagreement. And all I can really, all I'm contributing as a teacher blogger is that point of teaching debate. There should be a philosophy of teaching, not just a philosophy of education. We actually have something to say. And of course, teachers are graduates. So often when people talk as though teachers are below the discussion, not intellectually up to it, you have to start thinking, well, actually, just because someone teaches children doesn't mean they don't have a fair grasp of how you tell whether something's true, how you spot an invalid argument, how you weigh up. There's a lot of, I think, untapped.
No, let's.
Right, here we go. That was.
We've cut Andrew off in his stride there, Martin. But it's a great interview that he goes on to talk about all sorts of moral and religious and philosophical points, doesn't he? Indeed
he does. And shall I say, I think all three interviews this week are well worth catching up on during the week when they'll be released. So please subscribe. Make sure you click that bell so you know when stuff is coming out on the channel. And there'll be a lot of stuff we'll be releasing next week for your delectation.
And indeed, we're going to do some show reels and shorts. But the other big reason for subscribing is to be part of the weekly prize draw. And this week, Martin, we've got a couple of copies of Sir David Carter and Laura McInerney's book, Leading Academy Trusts: Why Some Fail But Most Don't, available for lucky subscribers. Who's won this week, Martin?
Well, let's have, oh gosh, I can't read anymore. Matt Swain. Didn't Matt Swain win before? I don't know.
So you need to get in touch on the email address, which is hello@itsyourtimeyou'rewasting.co.uk, and we will, with your address, and we will send you a book.
And the other one is Jody Lopez. Jody, that's
exactly the same. Get in touch. Email us at hello@itsyourtimeyou'rewasting.co.uk, and the book will be on its way to you. Thanks ever so much. It's been a great episode, Martin.
It's been enjoyable. What a way to start your half term.
I know, you lucky people. But it's 7 o'clock, and probably, if you're anything like me, you've got some serious drinking to do. But have a great week off, those of you who are off. And don't forget to subscribe, and you won't miss the all of the things we're going to release during the week. And we will hope to see you again for an extra special 10th episode next week.
Yes, we are an episode, not an issue, as they say.
We are. It's hard to remember that, Martin.
Anyway, we'll fade to blue now, or wherever we're going to go, and see you soon.
And don't forget, it's been your time. You've been wasted. Bye.